It's really getting exciting in the National Football League right now. So now it's time for NFL picks and predictions. Week 5. So, definitely some interesting games we saw for week 4. Kind of showed that while it may have not been as a surprise as week 3 overall, there were still some surprises there. It's like Broncos won the second time. Cincinnati had their first win. Buffalo could not blow up the scoreboard against Baltimore. There's definitely stuff that I was not expecting, but in the least, it still kind of tells me some things about those teams, whether or not, okay, maybe they started slow, but now they're starting to get in their groove. There could be other teams where you kind of wonder, are they really going to hold up all season? Or did they just kind of get lucky one game? So we're going to go more into that with the upcoming games for week 5. And as we go into the games, I'll kind of maybe go into a little more detail about how I see the teams going forward, because that's why they say don't really bet much within the first 4 weeks, because the teams can be kind of volatile. This is getting to the point in the season where it's starting to get a little bit more tight, where you kind of have a better idea of how the teams are going to go the rest of the season, and at least get a good idea of who for sure will get a spot in the playoffs, who probably is not going to the playoffs, and who's still a maybe. So I'm going to break this down a little bit as I go into each of the individual games of week 5, and I'll talk about the teams in a little more detail, and based on what I know so far about them, I'm going to talk about how I feel that they will be performing the rest of the season. And as I said, some of the games I may have made certain picks, but I did mention a lot of games would be competitive, that I wasn't sure who would pull out the win. I'm just really mad at myself for not betting on the Broncos last week, because that would have been a pretty good payout with those underdog odds. But we can't get mad about that anymore. We just have to move forward. So let's get started with Thursday night's game, which is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta Falcons. Now, here's what I will say about both teams. Kind of like what I've said in previous videos. The NFC South is not really going to be that joke division this season. Probably none of the teams are Super Bowl material, but I could easily see maybe one team wins the division and then another team is the wild card. Because the last 2 seasons, it was almost a race for the bottom. And the one who won the most games really did not have a great record, but they have to let someone from the division into the playoffs. This season, I could easily see you have the winner and possibly one of the other 3 teams as a wild card in the playoffs, depending on how the rest of the NFC goes. Let's kind of talk about Tampa. So we've seen with Tampa so far, they're not doing bad. They're off to a pretty good start. 3-1 record. Can't really complain with that. But who do they lose to? The Broncos. Now, that could just mean maybe Tampa was having a bad day, or that maybe the Broncos are just stepping up and playing better. And I think it could be a little bit of both, actually. But I'd say it's more about Denver really stepping up their game, which I'll get more into that as we get into their game this week. So Tampa actually kind of surprised me with beating Philadelphia. Sure, I was thinking, okay, there's a chance that maybe they could beat them by a field goal, because I saw how Philadelphia played, how they held back New Orleans. I'm thinking, okay, Philadelphia is going to play harder. They want their revenge on Tampa for beating them in the playoffs last season. Well, that didn't happen. Tampa beat them. It was like a 2-score game. They've definitely shown that they are going to be more competitive this season, and I think the record last season was like 9-8, so I'd say worst case scenario, they keep that 9-8 for this season. I think that'll be good enough for Tampa to at least have a wild card spot, but I do think they have more competition this season to win that division, so they definitely have to fight for that spot. I'd say one team that has really surprised me so far this season, the Atlanta Falcons, because we think about Kirk Cousins, and I'm thinking, okay, he'll probably make the team play better, but don't get your hopes off that they could be a Super Bowl contender. I still think that is a huge long shot that Atlanta will go to the Super Bowl. I'd say they have a decent shot of making the playoffs. And if they keep this up, they may not just be a wild card, they could actually win the division, because I would honestly say, like, starting out this season, I thought the AFC South was a fight between Tampa and New Orleans. And at this point, Atlanta, they knocked off Philadelphia. It was a close game. But then last week, they knocked off New Orleans. And New Orleans seems to be kind of dropping some. And that's interesting, how you had some teams performing bad the first 2 weeks, but then kind of getting better the last 2 weeks. But New Orleans seemed to be the opposite. They started on fire, and now they're dropping a little bit. But we'll get more into that as we get to their game. And all I have to say about this game is it's definitely going to be a great game. Definitely going to be one of the weeks you really go out of your way to watch Thursday Night Football. I'm going to love watching this division rivalry, and whoever wins this game will probably have the most momentum to win the NFC South going forward in the season. According to the odds, Atlanta's a slight favorite. Point spread is minus 1.5. Now, if I had to guess, based on how I've seen Atlanta performing the last few weeks, they did almost beat Kansas City. They came close to beating them. They definitely gave them competition, and that is Kansas City. So, like, Atlanta's not seen as one of the top teams, but they almost knocked off the number one team. And then last week, they knocked off New Orleans, who didn't seem like they were playing that bad, but managed to take the game with that field goal towards the end. I do think this game could very well come down to the wire. I'd say Atlanta's a slight favorite, probably because they have home field advantage. Now, I don't really know necessarily if that will help them. In the end, it's ultimately going to come down to who really shows up. I mean, if Tampa plays like they did against Denver in Week 3, they're a done deal, but they put up a pretty good fight against Philadelphia. I have said before that I've taken a liking to Tampa, being a former Brady fan, but if I feel like I'm going to go on Tampa, then I might jinx them. So for this game, it's obviously a coin toss for me, but I'd say based on how I've seen Atlanta performing, I think it'll be close, but they edge out the win. I'm going to have to go for Atlanta on this one, but don't put a lot of chips on it, seriously. So on Sunday, we have our first game, one of the international games, which is going to be earlier than the rest. New York Jets and Minnesota Vikings. So currently, we have Minnesota, who is the favorite. Point spread for them is minus 2.5. And Minnesota has really proven that they are a contender. They have even shown that they could potentially be a Super Bowl team. Just based on how I've seen them previously, I think they'll easily have a spot in the playoffs. But as far as going to the Super Bowl, I'm not sure. Based on some of the other NFC teams, I mean, some of the top NFC teams that we expected to be Super Bowl contenders before the season started, they're not really performing as well. Minnesota is. Sam Darnold has definitely surprised a lot of us this season, so for now, I'm not going to underestimate him and the Minnesota Vikings. I think they've got him, they got Justin Jefferson. I think they can easily hold off the New York Jets because I did actually think that the New York Jets would beat the Broncos. Part of why they lost is the Jets missed a field goal at the end of the game that would have handed it to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, the Jets are overall a better team. It just means that that game was kind of more the defense. And if they couldn't hold off the Broncos, I don't think they can hold off the Vikings with how well they've been playing. And you look at the Vikings with Green Bay. Thankfully, Jordan Love was feeling good enough to play. They definitely put up competition and they definitely erased a deficit, but it wasn't enough for them to take the game in the end. They still lost by 2 points, but it was still a very close game. Probably one of the best games of last week. Minnesota, still undefeated this season. I think they will stay undefeated after this game. I'm going for Minnesota on this one. I know it was a 2-point game last week. I think they can win by at least a field goal. So if you go point spread or money line on Minnesota for this game, I'd say both those would be good bets. So then we've got the Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals. So two teams that definitely surprised me last week, and both in good ways. So first of all, I'd say Baltimore was one of the top surprises for me last week. And you saw me on the last video. I thought for sure Buffalo would hold off Baltimore because I'm thinking, okay, Baltimore might have an early lead, but they're going to blow it in the fourth quarter. Buffalo's going to overtake them. They're going to smash them. They didn't. They could barely score. And even if you had bet on Buffalo to score more points in the fourth quarter, which I think a lot of people were after seeing how Baltimore performed the previous two games, what happened? Buffalo didn't really score in the fourth quarter. Baltimore may not be a second half team, but Baltimore still played decently in the second quarter and still were putting up points. And I'm like, man, I was not ready for this. I wasn't expecting it. And then Buffalo to be blowing up the scoreboard as much as they have, they just couldn't cut it, which means Buffalo, they are not inevitable this season. I still see Buffalo as winning the AFC East, but as far as it goes with the playoffs, I'd say they're probably going to go down in the divisional round in the playoffs, just like they usually do. That's just my guess. I think it's just going to be a repeat. I think they'll play well most games during the regular season, but I think when they get to the playoffs, it's going to look something like their game with Baltimore last week. Now, as far as it goes with Cincinnati, they did actually get their first win, and I know I did say to go for Carolina, so that's what's weird. I tell you 2 weeks ago, oh, Carolina's definitely going to lose. And then last week I'm like, I think Carolina's got it. Andy Dalton's going to trample Cincinnati. Don't get me wrong, Panthers definitely put up a good game. They definitely put up a fight, but Cincinnati was still able to hold them off, so props to them. I still don't see Cincinnati as a playoff team, but at least they're not a total joke at this point since they have at least one win right now. As far as it goes with this game, I still think Cincinnati's going to struggle, and I think if Baltimore can come out like they did the last game against Buffalo, I think Baltimore can easily take this game. If they kind of choke in the fourth quarter, Cincinnati might sneak up on them. So I do think it's interesting. Baltimore's currently the favorite to win. Point spread for them is -2.5. I'm going to have to go for Baltimore on this one. I think they pull off the win. I think they're starting to get life, and that Baltimore will go to 3-2. Now we got Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars. So one thing about Indianapolis is I know Anthony Richardson is their starting quarterback. I think he's not horrible. I think the Colts are kind of one of those teams that maybe started off like the Broncos. It wasn't so great for them at first, but they're starting to get in the groove. They may or may not make the playoffs. I think they're one of those maybe teams, which they could easily end up with like 9-8 at the end of the season, maybe squeak in as a wild card. But as far as it goes with this week, Jacksonville, they did lose. They haven't won any games this season. I mean, I think their season's practically over. They are the favorite to win this game, and point spread for them is -3. I could very well see it happening. They do have home field advantage. I don't think this game's going to be a blowout against them like how Buffalo trampled them in week 3. I would arguably say that Joe Flacco is a better quarterback for Indianapolis than Anthony Richardson, and I think he helped them win that game last week. So if Joe Flacco is playing in the next Colts game, I'd say that their chances of winning are going up. As far as it goes with Jacksonville, I saw that they barely lost to Houston. I think that Houston beat them 24-20. That was a very small loss, and of course that either means one of two things. It means Jacksonville's upping their game, that they're getting in the groove, or it just means that Houston is playing good enough to beat teams like Jacksonville, but they're not going to be a superstar team, which I'm still sticking with the latter. Houston easily could win the AFC South just based on their division being crappy, and I've said it in previous videos, I think their only competition is Indianapolis. This will definitely be a fun game watching this division rivalry between Indianapolis and Jacksonville, because if Jacksonville wins, it means, okay, their season's not entirely over, but if they do lose, it's like, okay, their season is all done. If they go to 0-5, just count it out. Just try to lose the rest of the season so you get early drafts for the next football season. Indianapolis has Joe Flacco. I think they've got this game. They have put up competition. They almost beat Houston the first week. They actually knocked off Pittsburgh last week, who I really thought Pittsburgh would be a top contender. I still think they have the best chance of winning the AFC North, depending on how well Baltimore plays the rest of the season, and Pittsburgh can keep playing as good as they have. They've all been one-score games, but Indianapolis has definitely kept all their games competitive. The fact that they've come close every game, if they did not win, shows that they are trying. After just seeing how well they played last week, beating Pittsburgh, I think that going against Jacksonville, they have a pretty good chance of beating them. It could very well be a one-score game, but I do think Indianapolis has the advantage. I think that Indianapolis will pull off the W and that they will keep their winning streak alive. So then we've got Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots. This is always a fun division rivalry. However, both these teams are at a disadvantage right now. The Patriots are just struggling. Miami, if they don't have Tua, they just fall apart, as we saw with the game they played with Tennessee. I did feel like Tennessee had the advantage. I didn't know for sure, but I thought they'd win. I just didn't know that they'd win by that much. Tennessee looked pretty good, but that was against Miami. It seems to be that Miami always seems to beat New England. That may not be the case. I mean, when Tua was out during the 2022 season, the Patriots did beat them. That's just because Miami, they were struggling. This game, it's going to be a hard one because at the top of my head, just because New England's a mess right now, Miami would have them. However, I've just seen how Miami can barely put up any points against their opponents. With Seattle, I could get that. Seattle has been a pretty good team. Even though they lost last night to Detroit, they still were very offensive. They still were pretty competitive. For Tennessee to hold off Miami like they did, it could go either way. Miami could maybe pull off something, but this game almost feels like a race to the bottom for me. Based on how I've seen Miami play, I'm going to have to go with New England on this game. I think they get the W. They will get their second win of the season. The Patriots will probably still have a better season than last season. That's all I'm going to say. So then we've got Cleveland Browns and Washington Commanders. Both these teams have kind of shown me a lot within the last couple of weeks because I thought Cleveland could probably be as good of a team this season as they were last season with Joe Flacco because I thought Deshaun Watson was a pretty good quarterback, especially when he used to play for Houston. But unfortunately, Cleveland has really been struggling, although they almost beat Las Vegas last week. And I think they would have if it wasn't for that penalty that cost them a touchdown. We know Las Vegas is really struggling right now. Maybe you could say that they were robbed. And you can have that opinion if you're a Cleveland fan, but the fact is, they are still struggling. Even if they had won, it would have still been a close game, still would have been a one-score game. But then you look at Washington on the other hand. Washington has been killing it the last couple of weeks. They start off, doesn't look too good. Second week, it's like, okay, they won, but that was just by a field goal, and that was to the Giants. Third week, it's a close game, but they hold off Cincinnati. And then last week, they destroy Arizona. And I actually thought Arizona had the advantage on that game. I thought they were going to win. Although Arizona is probably going to be a better team this season, it's really shown that, say, Arizona's improvement has maybe gone from like here to here. Washington has gone like from here to here. So Washington has had so much more improvement, I think, than Arizona as a team. I would almost tell you, going back to last week, I thought the NFC East was Philadelphia's to lose. Now I think it's really a toss-up between Philadelphia and Washington. I think whoever doesn't win will probably be a wild card in the playoffs, but if this keeps up, I will say that Washington can easily take NFC East. I mean, they have been incredible the last couple of games, and I'm definitely going to be interested to see how they play going forward. Jaden Daniels is definitely one to watch. He is a very good quarterback from what I've seen. I think he'll keep that up with Cleveland. I think Cleveland's still going to struggle. The odds are kind of close. They have Washington as the favorite to win by -3.5. For the fact that the point spread is -3.5, I think that Washington can easily beat out Cleveland and win by a lot more than a field goal. Just for the fact of just barely covering the spread. If they do win by a field goal, I would only go money line on this game for Washington. But I think they pull out the win and improve their record this season. So then we got Buffalo Bills and Houston Texans. This is going to be a fun one. Probably see both these teams as playoff contenders. It is very possible that they could come back to play each other in one of the playoff rounds. Now, as far as it goes with Buffalo, I know they struggled against Baltimore, but I think Baltimore was just on their game. That was definitely the best I've seen them play this season. I don't know if they flipped the switch and that Baltimore will keep that up for Buffalo. What does that mean for them? Are they going to just be shutting down like New Orleans did the last couple of weeks? Possible. I think that game was somewhat of a fluke for Buffalo. I think just because they may have struggled last week, I think they're going to come back. They're going to put a lot of points on the scoreboard on Sunday. And Houston, they could very well do the same, but think about how many games Houston's played against maybe mediocre teams, and they've barely beat them. Could this game be a one-score game? Yes. However, I'm going back to my opinion that I think Houston is being overestimated, because they were a slight favorite to beat Minnesota in Week 3. What happens? Minnesota crushes them 34-7. So, I don't think Buffalo's going to come at Houston like Minnesota did, but I still think Buffalo can pull off a comfortable win. Point spread for them is -1, so you could go point spread or money line. Both those are very good bets. I'm confident enough to say I think Buffalo wins this game easily. So then we have Carolina Panthers and Chicago Bears. Okay, this game is also going to be interesting to watch because Carolina lost last week, but they weren't crushed like Buffalo was last week. They will definitely keep the game competitive with Andy Dalton. Chicago, I think Caleb Williams can still do a decent job. I think this game will be competitive. It could easily be a one-score game, but that point spread is the dreaded -3.5. Chicago is the favorite. I probably wouldn't go point spread on this game. I'd say whatever team you think's going to win, go money line. Chicago could easily win the game by a field goal. I could easily see that happening. Carolina, they are going to probably make this game more competitive than some people think, assuming you're not a Carolina fan. I know a lot of people still see Carolina as one of the worst teams this season. I do not think so with Andy Dalton. I know they lost last week, but Chicago has been struggling some. I don't think they're playing as horrible or that they will play as horrible as people are used to. I think Andy Dalton's going to come out and surprise everybody once again. I think Carolina will win this game and get their second win of the season. So going to the afternoon games, we've got Las Vegas Raiders, Denver Broncos, going to be a fun division rivalry. So we've seen Las Vegas play. They've won 2 games. One game, they kind of took advantage of Baltimore screwing up in the fourth quarter and happened to squeak by. Then the last game that they won in Week 4, I really think Las Vegas would have lost if it wasn't for that penalty Cleveland got that cost them that touchdown. So I think they kind of lucked out with that game. You could say that Cleveland was robbed, and I'm still kind of debating on that myself, but the fact is, Las Vegas could keep it competitive, but I've seen Denver, they beat Tampa in Week 3, they beat the Jets in the 4th week, so I could really see this going either way, but think about it. Those teams that Denver beat were probably ranked above them, because Denver was one of the lowest ranked teams at the beginning of the season. Based on what I've seen with them the past 2 weeks, I think they are upping their game. Denver is currently the favorite to win. Point spread is -3. That's not a bad bet at all, because I do think whoever wins will win by at least a field goal. Either going point spread or money line for Denver would be a pretty good bet, but I do think Denver, at the end of the day, even if it's close, that they are going to hold off Las Vegas. I'm going to have to go with Denver on this game. I think Denver will get their 3rd win of the season on Sunday. So then we've got Arizona Cardinals and San Francisco 49ers. Another fun division rivalry. So first of all, I do want to say, I feel like this game will be more competitive than a lot of people are anticipating. Currently, San Francisco is the favorite. The point spread for San Francisco to win is -7.5. Honestly, that's one of those point spreads that I really hate. They win by a touchdown, they win the game, but you don't cover the spread and still lose money. So anytime point spreads are like -7.5, I just like to stay away from them. That's just my opinion. But as far as it goes with Arizona, they are a pretty good underdog because they got beat pretty bad by Washington, and then they did lose to Detroit Week 3, but it was still very competitive. A lot of people are pointing to San Francisco beating out New England 30-13 last week, and saying, San Francisco's going to be one of the top contenders going forward. Once again, that is possible. They did have most of their good players playing last week, except Christian McCaffrey, which I hope he is able to play later this season, that he is okay. However, who did they beat? New England. Let's look at Week 3. The Jets beat New England by 3 touchdowns. So, New England is an easy team to beat right now. Could San Francisco beat Arizona? Absolutely. Could they blow up the scoreboard against them like Washington did? Maybe, maybe not. I think with San Francisco, it'll center around what players they have on IR. If their team is all stacked, I think they can easily win. However, with Arizona, if Kyler Murray's doing great, I think they can in the least be more competitive. What I could tell from this season is that most of the games, except last week's game, Arizona has been more competitive. And I think they can keep this game more competitive. It could easily be a one-score game. I still think a lot of people are underestimating Arizona, and that's part of the reason I wouldn't necessarily go point spread for San Francisco, but I wouldn't necessarily go point spread for Arizona either. And in fact, if you want to just do a small bet on Arizona for those underdog odds on Moneyline, go for it. But just don't bet a lot, only bet what you can afford to lose. But when it all comes down to it, when it's all said and done, if San Francisco has their team, they'll probably have to play better than when they played New England last week. I think it's very possible for San Francisco to hold off Arizona and take the W on Sunday. Then we have Green Bay Packers, Los Angeles Rams. These were two of the top teams in the 2021 season, as you might remember. This season, of course, they may not be as good, but I do know Los Angeles is still struggling. They still are trying to find their footing here. A lot of the reason they only got that one win was because of a penalty that helped them. This was in week 3, I believe, against San Francisco. So I think the only reason Los Angeles had their one win of the season in week 3 against San Francisco was because San Francisco, their team was hurting, and then they got that penalty that helped them score that game-winning field goal at the end. Green Bay, I think if they have Jordan Love, that they will play a pretty good game. I know that they lost to Minnesota, and it's kind of interesting to see that, hey, the 2 games Jordan Love has played for Green Bay, they've lost. But then the 2 games with their backup quarterback, they've won. But keep in mind that the games Jordan Love was playing were against a more competitive team. I did say Minnesota's definitely one to watch. They definitely are playoff material. Whether or not Minnesota is a Super Bowl team, I feel like it's still way too early to decide. But I'd say for the time being, for this week, based on how I've seen the teams play previously, I think Green Bay, with or without Jordan Love, can hold off Los Angeles. If Los Angeles still has their top receivers on IR, Green Bay is the favorite to win the game. The point spread for them is -3.5. Going back to that -3.5, that's the only reason I wouldn't be comfortable betting point spread on them. I feel like if I was to bet on this game, I would go moneyline Green Bay. So whether or not they win by 3 points, or they win by 10 points, or they win by 24 points, I really think that at the end of the day, Green Bay will pull off the W, and that they will go to 3-2 on Sunday. So then we have New York Giants and Seattle Seahawks. I do not see this game being as competitive as some of the other games going on for week 5. However, one thing I can say is the last couple of weeks, the Giants have definitely upped their game some. They did definitely keep it more competitive against Dallas last week than when they played Dallas previous seasons. And they did beat Cleveland the 3rd week, but then again, that was Cleveland. So I still don't know if Cleveland's going to really be a competitive team this season. Going to this week, we're looking at Seattle. They had their first loss, but that was against Detroit. And even though Detroit beat them, it was like 42-27, knowing that Detroit is seen as one of the top teams right now, they still played pretty good against one of the top teams. I still see Seattle as playoff material. I think a wild card position in the playoffs is Seattle's to lose at this point. And I would still be confident enough to say I feel that they have the best chance to win the NFC West at this point. Arizona seems a little shaky. Los Angeles is pretty much a done deal. I'd say right now San Francisco is their only competition. All depends on how well San Francisco plays the rest of the season. That could really go either way. But I feel like Seattle has the most stability out of that division. Going back to what I said about their last game, they were playing Detroit. Detroit definitely put up competition against them. I do think this game will be more competitive than when Miami played Seattle. At the end of the day, I still think that Seattle will play better than the Giants, that they will keep their game up because they have shown, win or lose so far this season, that they are a pretty good team, that they are competitive, definitely playoff material. So Seattle is a pretty good favorite. The point spread for them is -6. That's not horrible, but I still want to see more from the Giants, because I do see, okay, Cleveland is not playing as well this season. Dallas probably won't be playing as well this season, so I could see why the Giants won those games, or at least kept them close. For this game, could the Giants keep it close? That's hard for me to tell at this point. I'd say Seattle could easily cover the spread. I don't think it's a bad bet to to go point spread on Seattle for this game, but I would not bet a lot. But I do think, whether or not it's a close game or they blow up the scoreboard, Seattle will win this game and improve their record for the season. So then we go to the Sunday night game, Dallas Cowboys and Pittsburgh Steelers. So I was really surprised that Pittsburgh lost last week to Indianapolis, and it kind of showed me that even though I felt I had most of the pieces to the puzzle this season after week 3, there's still quite a few pieces missing, and I think there still are going into week 5, but I think most of the puzzle is complete. Going back to what I've seen with Dallas this week, they had a huge win week 1 against Cleveland. Probably not a good team. Week 2, they lose pretty bad to New Orleans. Week 3, they lose to Baltimore, but they still kept it competitive. I feel like that was more based on Baltimore not being a fourth quarter team, not so much Dallas being a great team. Week 4, they played the Giants. They won, but it was not by a lot. This game is going to be interesting, but I do think Pittsburgh has kept every game competitive. Although a lot of people did not anticipate a lot out of them with Justin Fields, I'd say that they were really underestimated, that Justin Fields has probably outperformed a lot of people's expectations. And I think he's going to surprise Dak Prescott on Sunday night. Currently, Pittsburgh is a small favorite. Point spread for them is -2.5. I'd say that would be a pretty good bet. Or even if you want to go money line on Pittsburgh, that's a pretty good bet. I mean, it could easily be a one-score game, but Pittsburgh has home field advantage. I know so far this season, Dallas has done better on the road, but the teams they've beat have been some of the lower-ranked teams of the season. I just really don't think Dallas can hold off Pittsburgh this week. I mean, Pittsburgh may or may not blow up the scoreboard, because every game they've not shown that they are super offensive, but I still think they will hold off Dallas, get the win, and improve their record on Sunday night's game. So I'm easily going with the Steelers on this one. And then our final game of the week for Monday night, New Orleans Saints and Kansas City Chiefs. So if you've seen my previous videos on the NFL, you already know how I'm going to bet on this game, but I've got to talk about the teams a little bit. So New Orleans, I thought that they were easily playoff material at the beginning of the season. First 2 weeks they were on fire. Third and fourth week, they were not blown up the scoreboard, and although they had a competitive game against Atlanta, they still lost in week 4. Now this game, it currently has Kansas City as a favorite to win by -4.5. They could easily cover that point spread, but all of their games this season have been one-score games, so Kansas City could easily win by a field goal, and you wouldn't cover the spread. Plus, they did beat Cincinnati week 2, but that was only by 1 point. And then the Los Angeles Chargers, who they were supposed to easily beat, they only beat by 7 points. Plus, they didn't blow up the scoreboard either. The final score was only 17-10. So, Kansas City, sure, they do have the offense. They've got Mahomes. They've got Xavier Worthy. Even without Rashee Rice, they've still got... You talk about their receivers. People think, oh man, it's going to hurt the team if they don't have Rashee Rice playing. I know that he definitely played a key part and them winning the game in week 3 against Atlanta, and he's definitely one of their top receivers. Patrick Mahomes showed that even without Rashee Rice, he's got Xavier Worthy, he's got Christian Watson, and as I said previous weeks when people were like, oh, Kelsey's barely had any receiving yards, what happens? He's got him as backup, he's there if Mahomes needs him. What happens? Kelsey comes in, he's getting almost all the receiving yards, especially in the second half. So Kelsey's still there. It's just kind of like, he's maybe not his top go-to, but if they need a plan B, they definitely have that with Kelsey. And then when it comes to rushing, it doesn't matter if they don't have Isaiah Pacheco. He's got Carson Steele. He's got Kareem Hunt. So Kansas City is still a highly stacked team to where if they're down 1 or 2 good players, they've got so many other options. It's like Mahomes can work with just about anybody on the team. And even if they are not scoring, their defense can show up and hold off the other team from scoring. Because you look at the Week 4 game, all the points that the Chargers scored were from turnovers from Kansas City. So as long as Kansas City is not having turnovers, they can easily win the game. And I think that will be the same case against New Orleans. Now, I would bet on Kansas City regardless of how New Orleans had been performing this season. However, if New Orleans had played as well in the last 2 weeks as they did the first 2 weeks, I'm sure the betting odds would be a little bit lower for New Orleans, and they'd be higher for Kansas City, which I was kind of counting on, so I'd get a higher payout from Kansas City. But now, after seeing how New Orleans has played the last couple of weeks, I really don't think they stand a chance. Could it be a one-score game like the rest of the games Kansas City has had this season? Absolutely. But still, I would not go point spread on Kansas City. I'd go straight up money line, and if you want to put more chips towards this game, go for it. But only do it on money line Kansas City. And if you are a Saints fan, I said this to Chargers fans in the last video, if you are a Saints fan, still bet your money on Kansas City. I don't care if you hate the team, or if you go, I gotta stay loyal to my team. Hey, you can still wear Saints gear and cheer for them, but if they lose, guess what? The Saints lose, you still win money. So that way, you can't be all mad at the end of the day. I don't care who you are, who your team is, how you feel about anyone, how much love, how much hate you have for somebody. Bet straight up money line Kansas City on this game. And yes, I'm saying it right here. Kansas City, one way or another, Kansas City will definitely get the win for this game and will keep their perfect streak alive this season, going to 5-0. So these are my NFL picks for Week 5. What do you think? Comment below, let me know what you think, and stay tuned for my upcoming videos for NFL picks and predictions. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe so you are always notified when we produce new content on this channel, and I will see you in the next video.